Hey guys, we are here to finish up the notes for U3L3. This one was a little bit longer. Oops, I did it again. U3L3. Just because we're talking about the proofs, and so we got 4 examples we're going to look at right here. One really quick one, like we did on Friday, major, and then 3 a bit longer ones. So with these proofs, again, guys, since we're online, the least you can do is copy the picture when you do these proofs, because we're going to be given a lot of information about these triangles, and we need to show the markings on them, because that's how we tell which postulate we're going to use at the end here. I'm going to say what triangle congruency postulate makes them congruent. And it's not easy to tell unless you mark up your pictures. You have to. Can't emphasize it enough. So let's go through this. We've got a lot of given stuff, and that's what we started with. Hopefully we don't miss this on our test again at this time. All of this given information, our first reason is given. So let's go ahead. We've got angle E is a right angle. I'm going to mark that. Angle U is a right angle. I'm going to mark that. And then we have here EG congruent to UF. So here's EG, and here's UF. And then I have GO congruent to FN. We always want to mark those with separate marks so we know they're different. Now, already, this is an easy triangle proof. The easy proofs give you everything you need to know. The harder ones, we're going to have to find some information based on the picture. So we have enough information because we have 1, 2, 3 markings on our picture. Once we have 3 congruent things between the 2 triangles, I've got 1 congruent symbol, 2 congruent symbols, and the fact that these are right angles actually counts as well, because all right angles have the same number of degrees, which is what? 90. So these are actually also congruent angles. So let's look at what the postulate is. Now, whenever we have a right triangle, we always want to check for this one postulate, because this one postulate only works with right triangles. It's not guaranteed to be this postulate if it's a right triangle, but we always want to check. HL is hypotenuse leg. Now, in a right triangle, the hypotenuse, fancy word, I know, like hippopotamus almost, is across from the right angle. And we do have that marked. Here's my right angle. Here's across from my right angle. We have that marked, as well as one more side. And since this is a right triangle, we can say that this is going to be by hypotenuse leg. We'll just say HL. The hypotenuse is the side across from the right triangle. If we have a right triangle, but not the hypotenuse marked, it's not going to be HL, it'll be something else. And that's it. We said, even though we don't know all 3 sides and all 3 angles are congruent, this is enough information to prove they are the exact same thing. So let's make this a little bit harder now. So once more, at the very least right now, you need to copy the picture, and we're going to mark what information we have here. Now, all they said was that CD and OE bisect each other. So even though this doesn't tell us this is congruent to this, what we want to do is put on the picture, before we even look at the proof, what that tells us. What does bisect mean? See, you put it in your own words. What does bisect mean? Bisect means cut in half, but more importantly, cut into 2 equal pieces. So if CD and OE bisect each other, here's CD, here's OE. That means at this point, they cut each other into 2 equal pieces. So that means each of them is cut into congruent pieces. So I'm going to mark that on my picture. So CD is cut into 2 equal pieces. There's all of CD, 2 equal pieces. And OE is also cut into 2 equal pieces. We got this. We pulled this information from the definition of bisect. Now, we want to see what else we can mark in the picture before we look at the proof. If we go to the picture first and think, what can I mark? It's going to be easier to come up with your reasons later. So what else can we mark in this picture? Let's look at your cheat sheet you wrote, because you may watch that Edpuzzle because you were a good geometry student and did what you were told. There's something in this picture, because it's an X, that we can mark. We're going to be able to mark angle 2 congruent to angle 3. Look at your cheat sheet. What would be the reason we can mark those congruent? Those are vertical angles. We're going to be able to say they're congruent because they are vertical angles. Now, we don't have any other information given to us here in the given, and we don't have anything else we can just mark from the picture based off of what we see. So let's go ahead and let's look at the proof. Now that we have in our mind why we were able to mark those things congruent, our reasons are going to be a lot easier. Let's look at number 2. This statement says CS congruent to SD. So we marked that already. CS is here, congruent to SD is here. Why were we able to mark those congruent? What told us we could mark those congruent? The word bisect. So if you recall this on your cheat sheet, if you are given, in the given you have a vocab word, definition of that vocab word is going to pop up because that vocab word told us we could mark those congruent. Bisect means 2 equal sections. So it's going to be the same thing for the next one, ES congruent to SO. That's this right here, ES congruent to SO. The reason we were able to mark those congruent was because that's the definition of the word bisect. 2 congruent sections. Oops, sorry, 3. Now let's look at the next one. We have angle CSE congruent to DSO. Okay, well, they're saying this is true. Let's find these angles real quick. Oh, well, okay, they just named them a little differently. Angle, I'm going to change my color here. Angle CSE congruent to angle DSO. So that's just angle 2 and 3. So they're just not calling it angle 2 and 3, but it's the same angles we were talking about. Why did we say those were congruent? We already did say it. We had it in our mind, which is why this is going to be super easy now for our reason. Why are those congruent? What are they? Vertical angles. Vertical angles are congruent. So notice our last statement is now that these triangles are congruent. I'm going to erase this and put it back up again just so it's nice and clear. We had mark, 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 mark. So now that we've reached the end and we've given all the reasons, we have enough info. Look at this. We've got 1, 2, 3, and then we can say the triangles are congruent, and we'll work that way always. Once we have 3 pieces of a congruent, now the triangles are congruent. So here's how we decide what the postulate is. Ignore one of the triangles. Remember, guys, when we talked about this, when you choose the postulate, you only want to look at one. It gets a little confusing if you look at both. Look at the order of what we have. We have a side marked, another side marked, and an angle marked, but you have to look at the order. What postulate would this be? Side, angle, side. The angle is caught in between the 2 sides. Side, angle, side. So even though we do not know that all 3 sides in each triangle are congruent, this is enough information to say these triangles are actually going to be the exact same. Let's go ahead and try another one. Okay, so again, before we even look at our statements, we're going to go ahead and look at our given and mark everything we possibly can on the picture. So copy the picture. We're going to mark everything we possibly can here. Now, they have already marked one of the things for us. This little symbol right here, guys, this means perpendicular if you haven't seen this before. And so they already marked that. Here's FG and here's DE. If they are perpendicular, remember that means that they intersect at a right angle. So there's a right angle on that side. There's a right angle on that side. Now we also have another piece of information. G is the midpoint of DE. And here's DE. Now again, our goal is to mark things congruent. So this is going to tell us some things are congruent. If G is the midpoint, it means it's in the exact middle, which means the sides on each side of G are going to be the same. So take a second and try and mark, if G is in the exact middle, what pieces can I mark congruent? Try it real quick. If G is in the exact middle, that means from here to here is congruent from here to here. Okay, now once more, before we go to the proof, look at your cheat sheet you made off of the video we did on Friday. There's one thing extra in this picture we can mark because these triangles are back to back and they share a side. What can we mark here? Think for a second. If you look at your cheat sheet, we can mark this in the middle. Both of these triangles being back to back mean they share that side. And so if I were to separate these triangles, that side would be the same. And then we're going to come back to the reason for that, but it's on your cheat sheet. So now we have everything we possibly can marked in this picture. There's nothing else I can mark. Now let's go to our reasons. We started with the given. Let's go ahead and go to number 2. So it says, and again, you have to always think, why am I allowed to say this? It says angle DGF is a right angle. Think what information we have that allows us to say that. Let's look at our given. Well, we've got FG perpendicular to DE, and that G is the midpoint. One of those pieces of information tells us that we have right angles. Which word tells us that we have right angles? Perpendicular, midpoint. Perpendicular. So this is a vocabulary word. The reason is definition of that vocab word. Definition of perpendicular, and I'm going to abbreviate it. F of perp. Definition of perpendicular. So if we look at number 3, it's the same thing. We are allowed to say this is a right angle because that's the definition of perpendicular. Because we were given that we had some perpendicular lines here. Let's look at the next one, number 4. So I might sometimes need to go to the picture and figure out what they're talking about. I have angle DGF is congruent to angle EGF. Well, that's actually these two angles they were talking about here. DGF is my right angle, is congruent to EGF. So now they're saying our right angles are congruent. Now we already said this, but we know all right angles are congruent because how many degrees are in all right angles again? 90. So this is actually going to be our reason. These two angles are congruent. We can say this a couple different ways. We can say because all right angles are congruent, or we can say all right angles equal 90, however you want to say it. The reason we can say those two angles are congruent is because all right angles are the same. We'll make it simple. Again, we could say congruent or they equal 90. We'll say they're all the same so that you guys are understanding what we're talking about here. Okay, let's go to number 5. So we look at the statement. We give the reason for why we're allowed to say that. So here's what we do. We ping pong around. We look at the statement. We look back up the picture. We come down and give our reason after looking at the picture. So DG congruent to GE. DG is here. Congruent to GE is here. They're talking about these two pieces. Think back to what told us we were allowed to mark these congruent. We had a piece of information that told us we were allowed to mark them congruent. What was it? Midpoint. So because G is in the middle, those two statements are congruent. Sorry, those two segments, thank you, are congruent. So this is going to be definition of the vocab word that allowed us to mark them congruent. Definition of midpoint. Midpoint told us we were able to mark them congruent. So let's go ahead and go to number 6, last one here, and then we have enough information to say these triangles are congruent. I'm going to erase this again to make this a little bit clearer. Okay, so what we do, we ping pong. We look at the statement. We look at what it's referencing in the picture. We go down, we give our reason. GF is congruent to GF. Oh, hey, this was what we marked right here. This is on your cheat sheet. What is the reason we give if we are saying the same side is congruent to the same side? What is the reason for this? Reflexive property. You can go ahead and just say reflexive. It's a reflection. You are congruent to your reflection. They are the same thing. If we separated them out, they would be reflections of each other, the same thing. Now we have enough information to say these triangles are congruent. So once you get to the last step, we look to our picture and we say, what is the reason? Now here's the thing again. These are right triangles. I'm going to scribble out one of them You can just like cover it up with your hand and your paper, because I don't need to focus on both triangles. We're looking at one. Now this is a right triangle. Is the hypotenuse marked though? Nope. Here's my right angle. This side is the hypotenuse. It's not marked. So this is not going to be hypotenuse leg actually. The hypotenuse has to be marked. The side across from the right angle. There's no right angle across from. It's not marked. So this is not hypotenuse leg. So instead, look at the order that we have. We have two sides and an angle, but what order are they going in? What is this postulate going to be? Side, angle, side. My angle is sandwiched in between my two sides. This is side, angle, side. Okay, let's try one last one. Once again, you need to copy the picture, and let's go ahead and mark on the picture what info we have. We have HJ, this is parallel to KL, and HL parallel to JK. So here's how you mark this in the picture. Remember, parallel markings are the little triangles. We have HJ parallel to KL. And then when I want to mark two different lines parallel, I use two arrows. So HL parallel to JK. Now we talked about this once again on our cheat sheet. So look to your cheat sheet and what pops up when we have parallel lines. We have congruent angles. We know that, again, the whole goal of this right here is to mark things congruent. And we know that there are certain relationships when I have parallel lines that have congruent angles. Now here's the trick, guys. Again, the big one is alternate interior. That was the reason I gave on your cheat sheet. That's pretty much all the time going to be that one. So alternate means on different sides of the bridge. So if I want to mark this angle congruent to something over here, this is my bridge, right? It looks a little bit different than normal, but this is my bridge. So alternate means it needs to go on the other side. So those are congruent because we have some parallel lines, they're alternate interior, but also on the flip side, we would actually have this angle, I'm going to mark it with 2 now, congruent to that angle. Those are also alternate on opposite sides interior angles. There's one more thing in this picture I can mark congruent because I have 2 triangles with a shared side. Go ahead and try to mark it. What else can I mark in here that since they have a shared side? We can mark HK congruent to HK because they're sharing that side. If I pulled these triangles apart, it would be the same length. So let's go ahead and go to our reasons now that we have in mind what they should be. So we have angle LHK congruent to HKJ. Let's find those in the picture. Once again, you read the statement, you go to the picture, you remind yourself, why did I mark those congruent? What reason do I have? So let's follow this. LHK, this angle right here, congruent to HKJ. So we're looking at the 2 that I marked with 2 markings. Why did we say those were congruent? What relationship do they have again? Alternate interior angles. Got some parallel lines. We're going to have some alternate interior angles being congruent. These are going to be the other angles on the opposite side. We have JHK, so this angle, and then LKH, so this angle. Once again, those are going to be alternate interior. Okay, let's look at statement 4. So we read the statement, we looked at the picture. It says HK congruent to HK. Little hint here. Even if you don't look at the picture, the reason for this will always be the same thing. If you have the same thing on both sides, why were we allowed to mark this congruent to itself? Reflection property. You are congruent to your reflection. Okay, and now our last statement is the triangles are congruent. So once we reach our last statement, guys, it will always be a triangle congruency statement. I'm going to go ahead and scribble out once more. One of the triangles, you'll just cover it with your hand. And I'm going to remove these as well. Parallel line markings do not tell us things are congruent, or I should say, They don't tell us that these are congruent, just parallel. But they don't tell us they're congruent. So we're not focusing on that. We're focusing on these markings. Look at the order they are in. I have 2 angles and a side. But look at the order. What postulate would this be? This is going to be angle, side, angle. If it helps you out, angle, side, angle, ASA. Do that. And then you can see it more clearly. Oh, hey, that's going to be angle, side. We're going to practice this 1 or 2 more times in class before you guys do the assignment in class on Monday. Hopefully it's making some sense how we attack these questions, though.